Sonic Super Digest 9. It took until I was almost done with the reboot for me to even bother reading the story because it wasn't on the timeline. It starts out with Bunny seeing Sonic deal with a machine in a training simulation of Nicole's. Not that you know that if you were new to the story arc, because there's not a text box telling you about it. It was hard enough to believe that during this exact same simulation, both Antoine and Rotor would be thinking back to their lives before this. But now Bunny's gonna do it too, instead of it being a discussion over a campfire. So, nothing we didn't already know, Bunny wanted to be a hairstylist. And then, things get incredibly dark and edgy. In this comic, Bunny was caught in an explosion when Eggman took over Metropolis, which actually blew arms and legs off. This is a kids' comic, isn't it? Isn't that always the defense in Sonic? Well, throw that all out the window because kids will be scared by this. I've read his other M comic, and the exact same thing happened to multiple of the main characters in that, where they got injured by an explosion and had to get cybernetics to fix it. There, a good Robotnik gave them the cybernetics, which was interesting. Why does it have to be only Bunny? Like, she's the only one this happens to? This is pointlessly depressing of a change compared to her simply being half roboticized. If he really wanted to improve on things, he would have done the same backstory as Archie, but had Sonic not be responsible for what happened to her because he was sitting there and talking and took forever to save her. Instead, he just shows up just in time. I'm surprised that Bunny was the first patient of Chuck's prototype roboticizer. This is especially confusing because she needed this after Eggman took over Metropolis. You'd think that since the Archie comic was based on SAT-AM, and that's the whole reason it exists, he'd have taken over the city so easily while knowing how to use and build a roboticizer. Instead, he hadn't roboticized a single person at that point. So how did anyone stay in Metropolis? There wasn't a wall around all of it. Well, at least this is being created by being different. Very different. But there is absolutely no reason that Bunny would have a hard time walking with her new limbs. I knew this was coming a long time ago. Even today, we have emerging robot limb technology which lets people feel with them just fine. Even in 2015, an artificial prosthetic leg was invented which lets someone feel at the bottom of the foot. People can feel stuff in fake robot hands now. And we haven't invented free-willed AI yet. We're 100 years before that point. And even we have better robot limbs than Bunny. Granted, the news articles I found about those breakthroughs are dated at like 2019. And this issue came out, what, 2013? Even then, he should have known better than to assume that even 100 years from now, robot limbs would still lack a sense of touch. Which is the only reason she'd be clumsy in them. Chuck's a do-anything scientist. He invented a roboticizer in the first place, so he should have known not to make even Uncle Chuck's cybernetics be this limited. When the technology on his world is way more advanced than just a few years. So if he was trying to be realistic, well, that's a dumb excuse, because it's not realistic anymore. So either he severely underestimated how long it'd take for science to march on, and thought it'd take a century, not a couple years, or he really didn't like Bunny. He wasn't really okay with her, so he had no problem whatsoever with making her suffer. And I know why. She doesn't have an interesting and entertaining personality, so I've never been crazy about her. Same goes with Nicole. It's easier to want to write what you find to be an uninteresting character to go through darker stuff. But even I find it baffling that he would go out of his way to give her a tragic, dark and edgy backstory. Real life has better robot limbs than this, and Chuck is supposed to be a brilliant inventor. And he lives in a world with Eggman's robots in it. She wouldn't be clumsy, and they wouldn't be hurting, because there's no reason for it. They're not damaged, so why would they be programmed to cause her pain? That was just an extra layer of spite. There's no way he was trying to be realistic with that, because I don't see where that comes from. Flashback to early Archie where she was first half roboticized. Immediately, she was able to run around to pick up Sally's throne, and she was grateful to have that awesome super strength. That's pretty awesome of her. It drove home the fact that she was meant to be cheerful, not bring us down. Right away she wanted to use her newfound strength to be a freedom fighter. I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. I found it weird that she wasn't upset about how she looked, but still, her being able to move around just fine made more sense than this. Of course she'd still be able to feel in those limbs. They're just her old limbs but made of metal now. How would being metalized result in the touch receptors that were there before magically disappearing? Even if the explosion in the reboot destroyed her original limbs' touch receptors, I still have to wonder why they wouldn't have been simulated in the mechanical limbs they were turned into, with some adjustments. It just makes Chuck look like an incompetent amateur at making robot limbs considering how far we've come. Also, she says, "my new friends." So another bit of originality that she wasn't friends with Sally and the others until after Eggman attacked, when that wasn't the case in Sad AM. But it does make sense that only special circumstances would cause her to be able to be friends with the princess. Antoine might have only been friends with her because he was a soldier apprentice for the royalty. But it makes a bit less sense that Bunny's from the same city as everyone else in her group of friends, because she has a Texas accent. It didn't stop having it from lifelong exposure to other people without it. So I can understand the logic behind her being originally from Sandblast City where people had her accent. And if she's from the same city, why not just make her Sally's childhood friend at that point? She was cut off from their group, like she didn't live close enough to them, and yet still lived in their city? I don't like that it's almost at both ideas and doesn't just go with one or the other. This backstory isn't very creative. It's just Other M comic Fiona's backstory, but a different person injured her and a different person half roboticized her. And she was already part of Mobotropolis in Sad AM. Why isn't the story ended already? All of the plot has been told. Everything after this is nothing new, and the comic space could have been used on literally anything else. Like telling us where Sonic lived before he knew about Knothole. How am I expected to believe it makes sense that Bunny had to be made unconscious first before some upgrades on her cybernetics could be done? That's dumb and never happened before. And that's the second time that Flynn skipped out on showing us what Antoine said to her when proposing to her. I'd rather have this entire page spent on that instead. This is just reusing of the same panel we saw last time. Anyways, in the present, Bunny blasts a laser, and the others attack stuff with their weapons. Wait, are you serious? Their mission didn't end with that? With all those explosions? Instead, she says they have to go help Team Rose. So we'll never even get a satisfying resolution to this training simulation story. The rest of the issue is reprints, so I'm ignoring it. This issue is by Ian Flynn. It had exactly the problems I always heard it would have. Most of it was really boring. Bunny's new backstory is that she came from Mobotropolis, but inconveniently wasn't friends with Antoine and Sally yet. When Antoine's a commoner, so why'd he get to be friends with Sally first? Why was he sent to this country? As a kid. Anyway, she got her limbs blown off because of Eggman when he was taking over the city. That surprised me. I thought it would have happened while Sally was a freedom fighter. I thought it would have been anywhere but Mobotropolis. This overly dark and edgy change is directly from his gory Other M comic, where tons of the main characters have this happen to them to justify their cybernetics, as opposed to them simply being half roboticized, which is obviously simpler and way more kid-friendly. It's just needlessly mean. It goes to show you that he hasn't changed a bit if he finds this suitable. Ironically, Bunny didn't have cybernetics in that fan comic. Just chargeable gloves that could shoot lasers. He's making up for lost time, apparently. My biggest problem with this frustratingly mean story is that I'm expected to believe she was clumsy with her new limbs at first, and they even hurt, which makes absolutely no sense. Even with our most modern technology today, it makes Chuck look like an amateur.